Dad, I know that one day you'll forgive me. Elizabeth's voice trembled as she gripped my shoulder, the same hand I'd held through her entire childhood. But this time it was cold, distant, and inside that touch was something far crueler than betrayal. I looked into her eyes, once so innocent, now clouded with calculation. She placed a folder in front of me and said slowly, "It's just a signature, Dad. A simple transfer, nothing more." That house, the one where my wife and I built our life, where Elizabeth first cried out into the world, had become a bargaining chip in the hands of my only daughter. I let out a dry laugh. "And if I don't sign?" She lowered her gaze and whispered, "Then I'll find another way." The monitor beside my hospital bed beeped in slow, heavy beats, and I knew, from that moment on, we were no longer father and daughter. We were two souls stepping into a war where love and greed are separated by a single, fragile word: trust. Stay with me, because what happened next will make you question everything you thought you knew about love, forgiveness, and the price a father pays when the knife comes from his own child. My name is Albert Monroe, 68 years old. I used to be a construction engineer, a man who spent his entire life building homes for others, yet somehow failed to keep his own standing. 12 years after my wife Mary passed away from cancer, I've been living quietly in a small house on the outskirts of Charleston. The same home once filled with laughter from a little girl, now haunted only by the ticking clock and the sound of wind through the window frames. Elizabeth, my only daughter, is 34 now. She works as an investment manager in New York. She rarely visits. And whenever she calls, the conversation always circles back to numbers, to financial strategies and asset planning. She once told me, "Dad, I just want you to live more comfortably. You don't need to hold on to that old house forever." I laughed softly. "You don't understand, sweetheart. This place isn't just a house. It's your mother's soul." Every morning I wake at 6, brew my black coffee, and sit on the wooden porch, looking out at the line of oak trees Mary and I planted together back in 1987. When sunlight filters through the branches, I almost hear her laugh again, teasing me. "Albert, you've got dirt on your hands. Again." Those memories keep me anchored, thin, fragile threads holding together a man who has nothing left to lose. I still remember when Elizabeth was little, her blonde hair tied in a messy ponytail, tapping her toy hammer on the wooden frame I was building. "Daddy, when will this house be finished so Mommy and I can move in?" I smiled, lifted her onto my shoulders. "When you're old enough to paint the walls yourself." That house was a promise I made to my wife. If anything ever happens to me, you and our daughter will always have a place to call home. But fate has its own cruel humor. Mary left first, and I was the one left behind to watch our daughter try to take away the only thing that still connects me to her. I remember that rainy night in 2008, the day we buried Mary. Elizabeth was 17, clinging to me, sobbing until she could barely breathe. "I'll take care of you, Dad. I promise." And I believed her, the way every father believes in his child's heart. But time and ambition have a way of reshaping people. The last call before she came back home, her voice was calm, detached. "Dad, I'm coming home this weekend. There's something important I need to talk to you about the future." I had no idea that the future she meant would be the day my daughter returned to take away my past. The day Elizabeth came home, I was standing on the porch, pruning the rose bushes Mary once loved so much. Elizabeth stepped out of a shiny black SUV, dressed in a tailored suit, hair tied neatly, her eyes cold and sharp. She looked nothing like the barefoot little girl who used to chase butterflies through our garden. "You still keep these roses, Dad?" she asked, a hint of hesitation in her voice. I nodded. "Your mother planted them. They still bloom every year. The only thing missing is the one who used to admire them." Her lips pressed into a line as her eyes swept around the house, quick and assessing, as if she were appraising it. Dinner that night was painfully quiet. The clinking of silverware echoed between us like tiny fractures in the air. I placed a piece of fish on her plate and asked softly, "How's work in New York?" "Good, but exhausting. Everything's a game now. Whoever's stronger wins." I said nothing. Just one simple sentence, yet it chilled me to the bone. My daughter, the same girl who once believed in fairness and kindness, now spoke of life like it was a battlefield. As she cleared the table, she paused by Mary's photo on the shelf. Gently brushing off the dust, she whispered, "If Mom were still here, things would be different." "Yes," I said quietly. She would never have let us drift this far apart. That night, when she went into her old room, I heard drawers opening, papers rustling. A strange unease crept through me, like darkness had slipped into a home once full of light. I walked to her door and knocked softly. "What are you looking for?" "Some old property files Mom kept in here. I remember seeing them once." "Why?" "Just curious, Dad. Don't worry." But that answer didn't settle anything. It only made the air heavier. Later, as rain began to fall, I lay in bed listening to its steady rhythm. I remembered Mary's words from her final night. "Albert, if our daughter ever loses her way, use love to bring her back." I had tried, for years, Tika, to keep that promise. But lying there in the dark, I felt something I'd never felt before. Fear. Fear that a father's love might no longer be strong enough to pull his child back from the edge of greed. The next morning I went out to the garden. Elizabeth was on the phone, her back to me, voice low but clear. "Yes, I'll bring the documents tomorrow. He doesn't suspect a thing." My hand trembled. The pruning shears slipped and fell, the blades sinking into the wet soil. When she turned around, I forced a smile, pretending I hadn't heard a word. But deep down, I knew. The battle had begun, between a father's love and his daughter's hunger for more. That morning, sunlight streamed through the window, cutting across the kitchen table where Elizabeth and I sat facing each other. In front of her lay a neat stack of documents, a light gray leather folder stamped with the embossed logo of a real estate firm. "Dad," she began softly, as if talking about something trivial, "I just came across a great investment opportunity. If you agree, we could triple the value of this house." I looked up, straight into her eyes. They were bright, but not the warm sparkle I used to know. Now they gleamed cold, like light bouncing off a computer screen. "Triple the value?" I smiled faintly. "Do you really think I care about money?" "No, but I just think you deserve to live comfortably, Dad. This house is old. Maintenance is expensive. If we sell it, you could move into a high-end retirement community. I'll take care of all the costs." I set my coffee cup down and tilted my head slightly. "You want me to leave the home your mother and I built with our own hands?" She averted her eyes, speaking quickly. "Dad, don't take it the wrong way. It's just a temporary transfer. I'll buy it back once the deal is done." Silence settled between us. The ticking clock on the wall seemed to mark every beat of a heart growing colder. I remembered when she was little, how she'd crawl onto my lap, flash a mischievous grin, and whisper whenever she wanted a new toy. "Just this once, Daddy. Please?" And I always gave in. But this time, that same "just once" carried the scent of betrayal. "Do you really need the money that badly, Liz?" I asked, my voice low. "You don't understand." She gripped her glass tightly, eyes flickering with unease. "Are you in financial trouble?" "Not trouble. Opportunity. It's a big investment project. I just need capital right away." I let out a quiet, bitter laugh. "So my daughter needs to borrow money by mortgaging her father's home?" "Don't say it like that," she snapped, then quickly softened her tone. "I'm trying to help you, Dad. You can't live in the past forever." I rose slowly and turned toward the window. Outside, the oaks stretched long shadows across the yard, swaying like memories that refused to die. "I don't live in the past, Liz," I said. "I live in the memories, where your mother still exists." "But Mom's gone," she whispered, her voice trembling. "You can't keep clinging to a house forever." I turned back to her, meeting her eyes, my voice steady but heavy with meaning. "If you truly want to help me, don't turn kindness into a transaction." She pressed her lips together, silent. The air between us thickened, heavy and still. Then she gently pushed the folder toward me, her tone hardened. "Keep it. Read it carefully. I'll come back when you're ready." When the door closed behind her, I stared down at the document, the first line printed in bold: "Conditional Temporary Property Transfer Agreement." Just a few words, but they chilled me like a sudden winter wind. I folded the papers and tucked them into the drawer, though my hands wouldn't stop trembling. From that moment, I knew the threat wasn't in the fine print or the numbers on a page. It was in the eyes of the daughter I had raised with my own blood and love, who was now learning how to negotiate with her father. 2 weeks passed after that morning. Elizabeth's calls grew sparse. A few short messages popped up on my phone. "You okay, Dad? Have you read the papers yet?" I always replied with one word: "Yes." and then silence. One late afternoon, just as the sun slid behind the ridge, a car pulled up outside. Elizabeth came in with a face I didn't recognize, taut, anxious. The calm, confident woman I'd seen before was gone. In her place was someone on edge, a woman carrying fear like a second coat. "Dad, we need to talk. Now." I set my book down and looked up. "About what?" "This house." She sat, pulled a stack of printed papers from her bag. The top page bore a bank's logo. "Dad, I don't know how to say this gently, but the house is in legal trouble." I frowned. "What kind of trouble?" "It's like this. Your mother used some certificate to secure a loan years ago, and apparently it wasn't paid off. The bank found out and is threatening foreclosure unless we act fast." I was quiet for a moment. Then I laughed. A dry, hollow laugh. "Are you saying my wife hid debt from me?" "I'm not saying that. But I've been dealing with the bank. They say someone with the proper standing needs to act quickly. You're older now. It would be easier if I take the name." She spoke with the slick confidence of a dealmaker, the kind you see on television, the ones who always know how to say what people want to hear. "Elizabeth, do you ever think before you speak?" I asked. "Dad!" she cut in, urgent. "I'm not joking. If we don't move now, they'll seize the property." I watched her while the late sun painted her face. This was the same girl who'd once been afraid of thunder, who'd run to me to be soothed. Now those lips were voicing a sentence that tightened my chest. "Let me see the papers," I said. "You won't understand the legalese," she replied. "Really, it's better if—" "Show me." My voice was low, final. She hesitated, then set the stack on the table. I skimmed the pages and felt cold wind sweep through me. There was no record of my wife's name. There were no default notices, no liens, no bank threats. What I saw instead were pre-drafted authorization forms, a temporary power of attorney, and a property transfer already formatted to put the title in Elizabeth Monroe's name. I looked up. "This is a transfer document." "No, it's a temporary authorization," she said. "Elizabeth." I slammed my palm on the table. My voice broke. "Don't try to lie to me." She recoiled, anger and fear sparking behind her eyes. "You don't understand. Everything I'm doing is to protect this house. If you don't sign, they'll take it." "Who?" I asked. "The bank? Or whoever your mother borrowed from?" She stammered and avoided my gaze. I knew then that this was a fabrication, a lie crafted to batter down my resistance. I stood, walked over to her, and my voice went colder than the wind outside. "You are not only lying to me, you are trampling on your mother's name." She turned away. Tears blinked at the corners of her eyes, but she wiped them fast and forced herself to speak. "You'll regret it if you don't listen. The world has no room for the weak anymore." The door slammed behind her when she left. Only the ticking clock remained, a small, steady sound marking the fracture spreading through my chest. I picked the papers back up. In the lower corner of the transfer form, someone had printed a name, my name, Albert Monroe. The signature line already had a facsimile of my handwriting, a forgery so clever an outsider might not notice. I had been waiting for this, in a way. I had felt the shift coming like a storm off the sea, but seeing it laid out on honest paper changed nothing and everything. She had prepared this beforehand. She had only been waiting for me to nod. I held the pen for a long time, my fingers numb. I stared at the printed letters of my name until they blurred. Then I whispered, more to the house than to her, "Elizabeth, you've started a battle you can't possibly win." 3 days after the argument, the house felt unnaturally still. I tried to keep myself busy, pruning the garden, fixing the porch roof, doing anything to fill the silence. Because I knew, if I stopped, I'd start to hear it, the faint sound of trust breaking apart. On the fourth afternoon, the mailman knocked on my door. "Mr. Monroe, here's your confirmation papers. The property transfer has been completed." I froze. "What transfer?" "This house, sir." "Someone signed on your behalf." The words sliced through me like a cold blade. I snatched the envelope, my hands trembling as I saw the bright red seal of the county property office. Under new owner, it read, "Elizabeth Monroe." My knees gave out and I sank into the chair. My heart pounded erratically, and for a moment I couldn't breathe. Not out of anger, but from the sheer raw ache of realizing that my own daughter had taken from me the one thing I thought was sacred between us: trust. I stared at the document. The signature read Albert Monroe. Almost perfect, but not quite. There was one detail missing, one only I would notice. The tail of the M should curve left. Hers was straight. She had forged me. I inhaled slowly and picked up the phone. "Dad?" Her voice came, calm, composed, almost cheerful. "What have you done, Elizabeth?" "I just finalized the paperwork for you. You agreed, remember?" "I never signed anything." "Oh." Then the bank must have made a mistake. I could hear the clicking of a keyboard in the background, the sterile hum of an office. She wasn't shaken. She wasn't hiding. She was comfortable. "Do you even realize what you've done?" I said quietly. "Forgery is a crime. Don't use words like that, Dad. I'm doing what's necessary. The world moves fast. You're the one refusing to keep up." Her voice was ice. Then, without another word, the line went dead. I sat there for hours. Every moment of the past few weeks replayed in my head. Every glance, every excuse, every hint I had been too blind to see. I opened Mary's old cabinet, the one that still smelled faintly of cedar and lavender. Inside, she'd kept a wooden box with all our original papers, deeds, certificates, her will. When I lifted the lid, my stomach dropped. It was empty. Gone. Everything gone. I understood now. The night she pretended to look for the land records. That was when she took them. It had been planned from the start. That evening, I sat alone in the dark. The house glowed dimly under the weak bulb hanging from the ceiling. Outside, rain began to fall again, heavy drops beating against the tin roof. In the rhythm of the storm, I almost heard her. Mary's footsteps, her voice, her disappointment echoing through the years. "You let her go this far, Albert?" I bowed my head, gripping the transfer document until it crumpled in my fists. "I tried to believe in her, Mary. I really did. But I was wrong." The next morning, I went to the bank to confirm the truth. The clerk scanned the documents, then looked at me with professional sympathy. "Yes, Mr. Monroe. The file was processed legally. We have your verified signature on record." "Let me see it." He pulled out a copy. A scan of an old document I recognized instantly. My 2017 life insurance form. She had used it. "Was anyone with her?" I asked. "Yes, a man. Marcus Dean." Her legal representative. The name hit me like the last blow of a hammer. Marcus, her ex-boyfriend. The same man I'd once warned her about. Smooth talker, unethical, manipulative. I had told her he'd destroy her someday. I just never thought she'd invite him to destroy me first. I left the bank and stepped out into the rain. The cheap umbrella I'd grabbed from the hallway barely covered half my body. People passed by, glancing at the soaked old man on the corner, perhaps feeling pity, though they couldn't know the truth. They couldn't know that I wasn't just losing a home, I was losing my daughter. I looked up at the gray sky, the rain sliding down my face like something heavier than water. "Elizabeth," I whispered, "you've chosen your path. But remember, the truth always finds a way back, even through the shattered heart of a father." 3 days later, I received a call from the Department of Social Welfare. "Mr. Monroe, we've received a report suggesting you may be experiencing memory impairment and are no longer capable of managing your personal assets. We need to schedule an evaluation." I went still. "Who filed the report?" "Your daughter, Ms. Elizabeth Monroe." The room tilted. I had to grip the arm of the chair to stay upright. A few seconds later, a dry, hollow laugh escaped me. The sound of a man whose trust had been ground into dust for the second time. That afternoon, Elizabeth showed up at the house, holding a bouquet of flowers as if nothing had happened. "You look pale, Dad. I brought you some food." I sat silently, watching her set plastic containers on the table, chatting as if there were no betrayal between us. "What have you done, Elizabeth?" I asked, my voice strangely calm. She looked up, feigning confusion. "What do you mean?" "The report to social welfare. They just called me." Her eyes flickered, but she recovered almost instantly. "Oh, that." "Dad, I only did it to protect you. I'm afraid someone might take advantage of you. We need to verify things for your own safety." "By accusing me of dementia?" I cut in. "Dad." She stepped closer, placing her hand on my shoulder. "You're getting older. You don't understand how complex these legal matters are. I just want to keep everything under control, to keep you safe." I looked down at her hand, the same hand that had clung to me when she took her first steps. Now it gripped my shoulder like a shackle. Elizabeth, I said quietly, if this is what you call protection, you've turned love into a set of chains. Her silence deepened, her eyes grew darker. You always want to be the good man, she said finally. But this world isn't for dreamers anymore. I can't let you ruin everything just because you're sentimental. Everything? You mean this house? Not just the house. My future, she snapped, tears spilling down her cheeks. Not tears of pain, but of someone afraid to lose control. In that moment, I realized she wasn't speaking to me as a daughter. She was negotiating like a business partner. I'm just a burden to you now, I said softly. You're willing to trade blood for ambition. She turned away, trembling. You'll understand, someday. And then she left, the house a mess behind her. The smell of wilting roses and bank papers hung in the air, sharp and metallic. That night, 2 social workers arrived. They spoke gently, asking simple questions, my name, my age, my address. I answered each one clearly, calmly. One of them, a young woman, glanced around the house and finally said, Honestly, Mr. Monroe, you seem perfectly lucid, but your daughter has provided medical evidence claiming you show signs of cognitive decline. I've never seen any doctor except at the local clinic, I replied. Let me see the name. She handed me the document. The signature at the bottom made my stomach tighten. The physician listed was Marcus Dean. I closed my eyes. It was all there now, the full trap. They had built an entire play, lawyer, doctor, fabricated records, a web spun by the very hands I had once guided across the street. When they left, I sat in the living room, staring at a framed photograph from Christmas 2001, Mary in the middle, Elizabeth leaning her head on my shoulder, both of them smiling. Now there was only me, sitting across from the picture, whispering into the emptiness. Do you see, Mary? Our little girl has forgotten who she once was. Outside, rain began to fall. Distant thunder rolled over the hills, and I felt as though fate had just shut the last door of this house, the last door of father and daughter. Every year, on the anniversary of Mary's passing, my relatives gather at Elizabeth's house to honor her memory. Since the transfer incident, I had stopped attending, but this year I woke up with a strange conviction, a quiet, unshakable feeling that it was time to face everything head on. I put on the pale blue shirt Mary had once picked out for me, buttoning it carefully, and caught the earliest bus into the city. In my bag I carried a small folder. Inside were copies of the transfer documents, the bank confirmation, and a USB drive containing a recorded call between Elizabeth and me, made 3 weeks earlier. When I stepped into the house, the cheerful buzz of conversation fell into silence. Heads turned. A few whispered, Is that Albert? I thought he'd moved away. Elizabeth stood at the center of the room, dressed in a black dress, her smile frozen. Our eyes met briefly. Then she looked away. Dad, you came, she said, forcing her voice steady. Yes, I replied quietly. Today's your Mother's Day, isn't it? The air thickened. No one dared to speak. I walked slowly to the altar, lit an incense stick, and murmured, Mary, I'm here today to say the things I should have said long ago. Then I turned around, my voice low but firm enough to cut through the stillness. In front of everyone here, I want to ask you, Elizabeth, why did you forge your father's signature to steal his house? The room went dead silent. All eyes swung toward her. She froze, but only for a second, then straightened up, her gaze sharp, composed, almost defiant. Dad, what are you talking about? I didn't steal anything. Everything I did was legal. Legal. I held up a document, the stamped copy of the deed transfer. This is the proof. My name, forged. You still want to deny it? An uncle spoke up nervously. Liz, is that true? Is what your father's saying real? Her jaw clenched. He's confused. My doctor, Marcus Dean, confirmed it. Dad isn't well. Someone's been manipulating him. I let out a quiet laugh, the kind that chills a room. Someone else? Then tell me, who took your mother's documents from the cabinet? Who filed a report to social welfare claiming I've lost my mind? Her lips parted, but no sound came. I stared into her eyes. the same eyes that once sparkled with innocence, now darkened by deceit. "Elizabeth," I said, each word deliberate, sharp as a blade, "you can deceive strangers, but not your mother's spirit. You're betraying your own blood." Aunt Helen, Mary's sister, suddenly stood up, tears welling in her eyes. "Oh, Liz, how could you do this to your father?" Elizabeth spun around, eyes glistening with anger. "You don't understand. He's not well. He's trying to ruin everything I've built." I reached into my pocket and held up the small USB drive. Then maybe everyone should hear this, and decide for themselves who's lost their mind. I plugged it into a Bluetooth speaker on the table. Elizabeth's voice echoed through the room, cold and clear. "You don't understand, Dad. If you don't sign, I'll find another way." A gasp rippled across the room. Someone muttered, "My God, that's her voice." Elizabeth's face drained of color. She stumbled back against the wall. "Dad, you recorded me?" "No," I said quietly. "I just kept a memory, so you couldn't lie to your mother when you meet her again." The words hit harder than any accusation. No one spoke. Even the candles on Mary's altar seemed to flicker with judgment. Then Elizabeth turned and ran, her heels clattering down the wooden floor, echoing through the house she once called home. I watched her go and exhaled deeply. "Mary," I whispered, "do you see now? I stayed silent for too long." Elizabeth's footsteps had barely stopped at the staircase when the room fell into a heavy, suffocating silence. I thought she would leave, but she didn't. She turned around, face pale as ash, eyes burning with fury and defiance. "Fine," she snapped, her voice cracking. "If you're going to humiliate me in front of everyone, then let's tell them everything." All heads turned toward her. She strode back to the center of the room, her hands trembling but her voice sharp enough to cut through air. "Everyone here knows my father had a stroke, right? Since then, he forgets things. He mixes up conversations. I took him for a medical evaluation, and Dr. Marcus Dean confirmed he's suffering from temporary cognitive decline. I kept quiet because I didn't want to embarrass him, but today he's forced me to speak the truth." A ripple of whispers spread around the room. "I did hear Mr. Albert's memory's not what it used to be. Yes, he once called me by my late brother's name." I could see their faces, the same relatives who once called me the most steadfast man in the Monroe family, now looking at me with doubt, all because of a few words from my daughter. Elizabeth took another step forward, her tone softening, but her words slicing like glass. "Dad doesn't remember, but he signed plenty of papers already. I just helped organize the legal parts. The house is still his. I'm just holding the title temporarily." I drew in a deep breath. The anger inside me had quieted, leaving only a sorrow heavy as stone. "Do you remember when you were little, Liz, and I taught you how to read blueprints?" I said softly. "I told you, one wrong line, and the whole house collapses. Don't change the subject, Dad. I'm saying truth works the same way. You can decorate it all you want, but one small lie will bring the whole thing down." I reached into my shirt pocket, unfolded a sheet of paper, and spoke clearly. "This is a medical report from Dr. Frank Morrison, the physician who actually treated me at St. Peter's Hospital 3 months ago. Dr. Dean was never authorized to examine me. You lied." I held up the document. The hospital seal glimmered under the lights. The relatives leaned in, murmuring louder now. "Good Lord, those are two different doctors." "So she made it up?" Elizabeth's lips trembled. I just... Just what?" I cut in, my voice echoing across the room. "Forge a doctor's name to validate your lies?" No one dared to move. The only sound was the faint buzz of the ceiling fan. Elizabeth's eyes flickered wildly before hardening, like a person lost but unwilling to admit defeat. "You don't understand," she whispered. "I did it because I was scared, scared of losing everything. You don't know the pressure I'm under." I looked at her, my heart heavy, not with rage but disappointment. Pressure doesn't give anyone the right to betray their own blood, Elizabeth. Uncle Robert rose from his seat and placed a firm hand on my shoulder. "Albert, we understand now. The whole family does. She was wrong." Elizabeth looked around, at the faces she once knew, now filled with pity and disapproval. She bit her lip until it bled. "You don't know anything. He's twisting this. He's trying to punish me because I wouldn't do what he wants." I quietly pulled out my phone, pressed play on a video I'd recorded the day the courier arrived from the property office. The voice from the footage rang out through the silence. Delivery for Mr. Monroe. Confirmation of property transfer. The new owner is Ms. Elizabeth Monroe. The words echoed like a verdict. A few people sighed, others shook their heads. God help her, someone whispered. She destroyed her own father. Elizabeth screamed, cornered and trembling. You're all blind. You only see what he wants you to see. He's the manipulator here. I looked at her, not angry, just weary. No, Elizabeth, I'm just an old man with nothing left to lose. You're the one losing everything that matters. She froze, then bolted for the door. Rain hammered against the glass as it swung open, her sobs fading into the storm outside. I turned to Mary's portrait on the altar, my voice low but steady. You see, Mary, I didn't come here to win. I just wanted the truth to finally speak for itself. The incense glowed red, smoke rising in soft spirals, a quiet testimony that justice, even when born from pain, begins at home. The door was still ajar. Rain poured down in sheets, cold wind sweeping into the room and making the candles on Mary's altar tremble. I thought Elizabeth was gone for good, but not even 5 minutes later she returned, soaked through, hair plastered to her forehead, eyes blazing. This wasn't the daughter trying to protect her honor anymore. This was a person on the verge of losing everything, clawing at something that no longer existed. You think you can humiliate me in front of the family? She spat. I don't have to do anything, I replied quietly. You're doing it yourself. Elizabeth slammed a stack of papers down on the table. Here, bank records, proof this house is legally mine. Nobody can take it back. I looked at her, shook my head slowly. You still don't understand, Elizabeth. The law can protect ownership, but it can't protect a deceitful heart. Stop it, she screamed, tears mingling with rainwater. You've always acted like you're so moral. I just wanted a better life. Do you know how hard I've fought to escape your shadow of poverty? Her voice cracked, a sob catching in her throat. I'm exhausted. I've sacrificed everything. If I didn't do this, I'd have nothing. I stayed silent, watching her. The same girl who once clutched my hand on her first day of school, who promised to take care of Dad for Mom, now trembling, both pitiful and terrifying. Elizabeth, I said slowly, no one here needs to know why you did it. They only need to know how you did it. I opened my leather case and pulled out a thick envelope. This is the handwriting analysis from the Charleston Forensic Institute. They confirmed the signature on the transfer papers is forged, and this, I lifted a laptop from the bag, is the security footage from the bank. All eyes shifted to me. I set the laptop on the table and hit play. The screen lit up with clear footage. Elizabeth entering the bank with Marcus Dean, papers in hand, signing in my name while the clerk asked, "Where is Mr. Monroe?" Her voice on the recording. My father authorized it verbally. He's very ill. A wave of murmurs swept the room. An aunt broke down in tears. Oh, Liz, what have you done to your father? Elizabeth went rigid. She stumbled back, lips trembling. No, it wasn't me. Marcus said it was just a formality. I didn't know. I met her eyes, my anger gone, replaced by a weary sorrow. You knew. You just chose not to listen to your conscience. Elizabeth's knees gave way. She sank to the floor, hands shaking as she covered her face. Her sobs broke loose, mixing with the sound of rain outside. No one spoke. One by one, relatives rose from their seats. Some came to stand behind me, a hand on my shoulder, their eyes heavy with sympathy. Albert, you've suffered enough. We'll stand as witnesses. No one can take your home from you. I nodded in thanks, but my eyes stayed on Elizabeth, sitting crumpled on the floor, shoulders quivering in despair. Elizabeth, I said gently but firmly, I don't care about the house. I only care if you can say one honest word. She looked up, eyes red, lips trembling. I was wrong, Dad. The entire room went still. Outside, the storm softened, leaving only the soft dripping of water at the doorway, like the sky offering absolution for two people bound by wounds. I walked over, placed my hand on her shoulder, and spoke quietly. You may lose everything, but if you can admit your mistake, you still have a way back. No one applauded. No one cheered. Only silent eyes bore witness as truth overcame greed, and a father chose forgiveness over vengeance. Yeah, and I looked up at Mary's portrait. The last candle still burned, its small flame flickering as though it were smiling. You see, Mary, Justice lives on, even if it arrives late. 3 days after that fateful memorial, the house was silent again. No visitors, no phone calls from relatives, just me, and the stack of documents spread across the table, the tangible remains of betrayal. I sat on the porch, sunlight cutting through the old oak branches. Mary once told me, if the day ever comes when our daughter loses her way, you must be the light that guides her back. I had tried to do that with love, but perhaps now love had to make room for truth and the law. The next morning, I went to the Charleston Legal Aid Center, a small nonprofit that offered free representation for the elderly and low-income citizens. The young woman at the front desk greeted me with a gentle smile. I'm Samantha Cruz, a volunteer attorney here. How can I help you, sir? I placed the worn folder on her desk. My voice was calm but firm. I'm not here for money. I just want my name cleared. To remove it from a fraudulent deed transfer. Samantha began leafing through the papers. With each page, her eyes widened. You're saying Ms. Elizabeth Monroe, your daughter, forged your signature? Yes. And she used falsified medical documents from a fake doctor to seize your property? That's right. But I'm not trying to have her jailed. I just want the truth acknowledged by the court. She nodded slowly, her expression softening into quiet respect. Mr. Monroe, most people in your situation choose silence. But you didn't. I was silent once, I said. And silence is how justice dies. Samantha gave a sad, knowing smile. I'll help you. But you should be prepared. Your daughter will likely hire her own lawyer. They'll fight hard. Let them, I said. When a man's lost everything, all he has left is the truth. 2 weeks later, the official complaint was filed with the Charleston Civil Court. Plaintiff, Albert Monroe. Defendant, Elizabeth Monroe. Claim, petition to annul the fraudulent property transfer based on forged signatures and legal misconduct. The story spread faster than I expected. The local newspaper ran the headline, Former Engineer Sues Daughter Over Forged Deed, a legal battle between two generations. I didn't read the comments, but Samantha told me public opinion was split. Half pitied me, half said I was shaming my daughter for money. When we left the courthouse that first morning, Samantha looked over and asked gently, Do you ever regret it, Mr. Monroe, taking your own daughter to court? I smiled faintly, my voice hoarse. No, I didn't drag her into this. She stepped into the darkness herself. Samantha nodded slowly. You know, I once worked a similar case. That father didn't have the courage to act. He said he'd rather be called a fool than have his daughter hate him. You chose to face her. That's real bravery. It's not bravery, I said quietly, gazing at the swaying oak trees in the distance. It's instinct, a father's instinct, to teach his child, even if it breaks him. That night, when I returned home, there was an unmarked envelope slipped under the door. Inside was a check, $50,000, and a short note scrawled in hurried handwriting. Stop this, Dad. I can make sure you're taken care of for the rest of your life. E. I stared at it for a long time. Tears filled my eyes, not from tenderness, but from the grief of watching my own daughter try to buy back her conscience. I folded the check, placed it in the fireplace, and watched the flames devour it. I don't need your money, sweetheart, I whispered. I just need you to understand the price of deceit. Moments later, the phone rang. It was Samantha. Mr. Monroe, we've just been notified. Elizabeth has hired Henderson Partners, one of the biggest firms in the state. I smiled to myself, voice calm and steady. Good. The higher they stand, the harder they'll fall. The mediation room on the third floor of the Charleston Civil Court was white and sterile, a long wooden table at its center, a water pitcher, and 2 rows of chairs facing each other. I walked in carrying my old black briefcase. Samantha followed, her young face calm, but her eyes focused like a soldier entering battle. Across the table sat Elizabeth, already waiting. Beside her were 2 men in gray suits, Henderson, her lead attorney, and his assistant. She didn't look at me. Her eyes stayed fixed on the papers in front of her, her hands trembling slightly before tightening into fists. Mr. Albert Monroe, Henderson began smoothly, his tone polished and cold. We represent Ms. Elizabeth Monroe. The goal of today's mediation is to reach a civil agreement to avoid a drawn-out court case. Samantha's smile was faint, almost polite, but her voice sliced like a blade. And your client's conditions for this agreement? Simple. Mr. Monroe withdraws his petition, acknowledges the transfer as legal, and in return, Ms. Monroe will provide him with a monthly allowance, $2,000. I looked Henderson straight in the eye and asked slowly, "Do you have a daughter?" "I do." "Then imagine one day she forges your signature, takes your home, and hires someone like you to legitimize it. Would you sign?" Henderson froze, his mouth closing. A moment later, he turned to Samantha, trying to shift ground. "Ms. Cruz, we have evidence that Mr. Monroe gave verbal authorization to Miss Monroe back in 2019. Samantha flipped through the file, her voice steady. "If you're claiming verbal authorization, we'll need written confirmation or a witness." "Do you have either?" "No, but—" "Then let the record reflect. You have no admissible evidence." She spoke crisply, then laid another sheet on the table. "This is our evidence. The Charleston Forensic Institute confirms the signature on the transfer contract is forged. And here," she held up another paper, "bank records from Northland showing that the account receiving the transfer funds belongs to Ms. Elizabeth Monroe. There has been no reimbursement to Mr. Albert Monroe." Elizabeth lowered her head, lips pressed tight. I heard Henderson exhale sharply, a telltale sign of losing control. "Mr. Monroe," Henderson said, his voice harder now, "Ms. Monroe isn't denying procedural mistakes, but it's clear you're escalating this to damage your daughter's reputation." I stayed calm. "No. I'm teaching my daughter that every wrongdoing has consequences." Samantha's voice cut in, cool and precise. "And if your client continues to deny wrongdoing, we'll petition for criminal charges of forgery and abuse of trust, penalties up to 7 years. If you want mediation, offer something real, a written admission, restitution, and a restoration of my client's name." The room went still. Elizabeth looked up, eyes flickering, her lips trembling. "Dad, I don't want this to go that far. If you agree, I'll give the house back. Just don't take me to court." Samantha gently touched my arm, signaling me to stay quiet. "Miss Monroe, pleading won't help here. Show good faith in writing, not in tears." I turned to my daughter, my heart heavy. "Elizabeth, I never wanted to see you in court, but if this is the only place where you'll learn the value of truth, then I'll stay to the end." She broke down, sobbing for real this time. Henderson said nothing. The air in the room thickened, the line between family and justice so thin it felt like one breath could tear it apart. Samantha gathered the papers neatly and stood. "This mediation is over. We'll file for a full trial." Before leaving, I looked at Elizabeth one last time. "You can still save yourself, Elizabeth. All you have to do is tell the truth." She lifted her tear-streaked face, fear in her eyes. "Dad, I'm scared. The truth is never as frightening as the lies you keep living." I turned away. Behind me I heard her quiet sobs, not the cries of someone exposed, but the first sound of a daughter beginning to realize what she had lost. 3 weeks after the failed mediation, the court officially reopened for the preliminary hearing. It was raining lightly that morning. I sat beside Samantha in the plaintiff's row, my hands folded over the old black briefcase. Across the aisle, Elizabeth sat with Marcus Dean, now her key witness. It had been over a decade since I last saw Marcus. I remembered warning Elizabeth about him back then, a slick young attorney with too much ambition and too little conscience. Now, dressed in a tailored black suit and red tie, he wore the smug grin of a man who believed he could out-talk the truth. "Your Honor," Henderson began smoothly, "we call our witness Mr. Marcus Dean to confirm that Mr. Albert Monroe granted verbal authorization to his daughter and even signed a preliminary draft at Mr. Dean's office in 2019. Marcus rose, stepping confidently to the stand. His tone was rehearsed, practiced to perfection. "I, Marcus Dean, confirm that I met Mr. Albert Monroe in April 2019. He said, quote, 'I trust my daughter completely. If necessary, let her hold the title in my name.'" The courtroom buzzed. I looked at him calmly. Samantha said nothing, only took notes, her pen tapping once against her pad. A signal. She was ready. "Mr. Dean," Samantha said, her tone light but razor sharp, "you claim you met my client in April 2019, that's correct?" "Yes." "Do you have any documents, recordings, or written confirmation of that meeting?" "I don't need any." As a lawyer, my sworn testimony is sufficient. Samantha smiled faintly. How convenient, she said. Because according to medical records, on April 3, 2019, Mr. Albert Monroe was admitted to St. Peter Medical Center for a mild stroke. He remained hospitalized for 3 weeks. He couldn't even leave his bed, let alone visit your office. Marcus's expression faltered, a crack in the mask. Samantha went on, relentless. And according to cell tower GPS logs, on April 4, 2019, you were in New Orleans, attending the State Bar Association's annual legal conference. I have your attendance certificate here, with your signature. She placed the printed record on the evidence table. The courtroom erupted in whispers. Henderson shot up from his seat. Objection! This data was not pre-filed for today's hearing. Incorrect, Samantha countered. This is newly discovered, court-approved supplemental evidence filed this morning. The judge has our notice on record. The judge nodded, flipping through his notes. Objection overruled. Continue. Marcus swallowed hard, sweat glistening on his forehead. Perhaps. There's a mix-up about the exact date. No mix-up, Mr. Dean, Samantha cut in, her voice turning glacial. There's fabrication. And if the court needs more proof, I can present an email sent from you to Ms. Elizabeth Monroe 2 days before the defense filed its response, requesting $20,000 as a cooperation fee. Gasps rippled through the courtroom. Elizabeth went pale. Samantha pulled out a printed email and slid it onto the table. On the screen above, the subject line appeared clearly. Subject: Agreement for statement support. $20,000. Confidential. Henderson's face drained of color. Where did you get that? He demanded. Directly from Mr. Dean's firm's server, Samantha replied coolly, verified by a third-party digital forensics lab. The judge struck his gavel sharply. The court will recess for 30 minutes to review the evidence. If verified, Mr. Dean's testimony will be stricken and perjury charges will be considered. Marcus sank back into his seat, trembling. Elizabeth sat frozen, staring down at her trembling hands. I turned to Samantha and nodded silently. She gave a small smile. No need to shout, Mr. Monroe, she whispered. The truth has its own timing. When the judge returned, the verdict was swift. The court finds the evidence valid. The witness testimony of Marcus Dean is hereby nullified. The defense is found to have submitted false statements. This case will proceed to full trial. Marcus buried his face in his hands. Elizabeth sat motionless, tears falling soundlessly. I exhaled, not in triumph but in grief. Watching her world collapse felt nothing like victory. Elizabeth lowered her head, her voice breaking. I didn't mean for it to go this far. I stood, walked to her, and gently placed a hand on her shoulder. You see, Elizabeth, I said softly, justice doesn't need protection. It only needs time. She sobbed quietly. Outside, the rain had stopped. Through the courthouse window, a pale beam of sunlight broke through the clouds, spilling across the cold tile floor. The first fragile light after a long, unrelenting storm. The news broke on a Monday morning. A small Charleston news outlet posted the first article. Headline bold and simple. Father sues daughter over forged property. Justice or betrayal. At first it got only a few dozen shares, but by that afternoon it spread like wildfire. Local blogs, national papers, TV stations, and every corner of social media picked it up. Within 48 hours, Albert Monroe was the most searched name in South Carolina. That night, a major news channel aired the story in its evening broadcast. The anchor's voice was calm, deliberate. A shocking family lawsuit. A 68-year-old father accuses his daughter, a rising investment manager, of forging his signature to steal his family home. Public opinion is deeply divided. Is this a man seeking justice, or the tragic collapse of a family bond? Clips of me and Elizabeth flashed on screen. Photos, courtroom sketches, even computer-generated reenactments. Online, the comments poured in. If my daughter did that, I'd never forgive her. No kid betrays their parent without a reason. What did the father do? Money blinds people. They both deserve pity. 2 days later, Samantha arranged a short TV interview for me. I said very little, just one sentence that lit up the internet. I don't want to defeat my daughter. I just want her to face the truth. By nightfall, that quote had been shared over 2 million times. They started calling it the father's line. Talk shows, news anchors, influencers, everyone repeated it. Meanwhile, Elizabeth vanished from public view. Her investment firm quietly announced she was on administrative leave pending investigation. The colleagues who once admired her ambition now deleted her name from team bios, pretending she'd never existed. A popular talk show aired a heated debate. The host opened, "I don't care about the legal side, I care about morality. When a father sues his daughter, that's a failure for both of them." One guest shot back immediately, "No, that's not failure, that's integrity. When love fails to teach, justice must." The argument went viral. Hashtags flooded Twitter. Justice for Albert, Justice for Albert, surged to the top trend. Almost as fast, another one appeared. Stand with Elizabeth. Two nations of opinion were born overnight. Half the country pitied me, the betrayed father. The other half defended her, the daughter crushed by pressure and greed. On the evening news, a reporter stood outside my house speaking into the camera. "We're here in front of the Monroe residence, where it all began." Mr. Monroe declined further comment, but sources say he's received hundreds of letters from across the country, many from parents who've been victims of the same kind of betrayal. They aired a clip of me watering the garden, my frail silhouette under the orange dusk. That night, my phone wouldn't stop buzzing. Messages from strangers, prayers, thank yous. One woman from Ohio wrote, "Mr. Albert, my son took my house too. Thank you for standing up. You gave me courage." I sat quietly by the window after reading it, eyes stinging. Outside, the late sunlight filled the yard. "Mary," I whispered, "I never thought our private pain would become the country's story." Across town, Elizabeth was living through her own storm. She hadn't left her apartment in days. Her phone vibrated endlessly with messages, some cruel, some pleading. Reporters camped outside her building, chasing photos whenever she stepped out for groceries or coffee. One young journalist shouted after her, "Elizabeth, do you regret betraying your father?" That question replayed on the evening broadcast, over and over, cutting deeper each time. In the freeze-frame shot that closed the segment, her eyes were full of tears, and for the first time, the nation saw not a villain, but a daughter breaking under the weight of her own choices. A week after the story exploded, Elizabeth's face returned to national television. She wore a crisp white blouse, hair tied neatly back, her cheeks pale but composed, the polished image of a successful financial professional reclaiming her voice. The host introduced her as a brave woman speaking out amid a media storm. From the very start, Elizabeth's eyes glistened with tears. "I know people hate me," she said, her voice trembling, "but no one knows what my life has been like for 30 years. My father isn't a bad man, but he's always controlled my life. I just wanted to be free, and I made a mistake." The line was perfect, emotional, rehearsed, and tragically human. It hit exactly where her PR team wanted, the audience's empathy. Within hours, headlines softened. Newspapers that once condemned her now questioned the narrative. A daughter's desperation or a betrayal too far? Elizabeth Monroe, in tears, "I just wanted to be loved." Behind the scenes, a powerful PR firm had taken charge, arranging photo ops of Elizabeth volunteering at nursing homes, donating to charities, handing out blankets to the elderly. Every image was crafted to show redemption, to frame her as a misunderstood daughter trying to make things right. Meanwhile, Samantha and I said nothing. No interviews, no rebuttals, silence, and patience. Because sometimes silence is how falsehoods hang themselves. 3 days later, Samantha arrived at my house, eyes alight with something fierce. She dropped a folder onto the table. "Mr. Monroe," she said, "I found something in the public notary archives. This is the truth no PR campaign can bury." I felt a chill run through me. "What is it?" "Mary's original will. The real one." I froze. My eyes traced the familiar handwriting. Gentle, deliberate. "This house shall belong to Albert Monroe until his passing. Afterward, it will transfer to Elizabeth Monroe, on the condition that she preserve it as a symbol of our family's memory." My throat tightened. The words blurred behind tears. Mary hadn't left us a house. She'd left us faith, the belief that our daughter would honor the love that built those walls. Samantha's voice softened. "If you'll allow it, I'd like to release this during our next interview, but be prepared. It will destroy her campaign completely. I closed my eyes for a moment, then nodded. Do it. Justice doesn't need pity. 2 nights later, we appeared on WRC News for a live special. The host didn't waste time. Mr. Monroe, do you regret taking your daughter's case so public? I met the camera's gaze. No, because the truth, no matter how painful, is the only thing that can save a soul. Samantha opened the folder and held up the document. The camera zoomed in. This, she said steadily, is the original notarized will of Mrs. Mary Monroe, dated 2005. It proves that the house never legally belonged to Elizabeth. And more than that, it shows what her mother truly wished, that the home remain a memory, not a transaction. The studio fell silent. Even the host sat speechless for several seconds before murmuring, "My God, there's nothing left to say." That night, the internet exploded again. A new hashtag began trending. Truth for Mary. Comments flooded in. She didn't just betray her father, she betrayed her mother's memory. No PR firm can rewrite that will. He didn't win, he just reclaimed what love built. By morning, media outlets retracted their sympathetic coverage. The redemption campaign collapsed overnight. The PR agency dropped her, and her publicist resigned. The next day, a shaky video surfaced. Elizabeth leaving her apartment, dark sunglasses hiding swollen eyes. No reporters shouted questions this time. They just filmed silently. A lone woman walking through a light drizzle, her head bowed low, as if trying to escape not the cameras, but the name that once meant Monroe. Within 12 hours of Mary's will being made public, everything flipped. The same outlets that once praised Elizabeth now ran public apologies. Opinion pieces defending her disappeared overnight. One national headline summed it up perfectly. From media darling to public villain, the fall of Elizabeth Monroe. Online, the debate was over. People stopped choosing sides. The verdict was unanimous. Truth had won. But for me, there was no triumph in it. Every time I saw Elizabeth's face on the news, thinner, eyes hollow, her once steady voice trembling, all I felt was an ache so deep it left no room for victory. Then came a grainy cell phone video that swept across social media. Elizabeth sat alone in a quiet cafe, no makeup, wearing a plain gray sweater. A young barista approached hesitantly. "You're Elizabeth Monroe, right?" Elizabeth didn't look up. "I used to be," she whispered. That 5-second clip went viral overnight, viewed millions of times. The comments were brutal, yet tinged with pity. Now she finally knows what it's like to lose trust. Heartbreaking. The father's pain, the daughter's ruin. While she vanished from public life, I found myself in its center. TV stations, podcasts, newspapers, all wanted interviews. Samantha tried to shield me from most of it, but I agreed to a few. Not to seek fame, but to speak for every parent who'd been betrayed by their own child. On Voices of America, the host asked gently, "Mr. Monroe, how do you feel when people call you the symbol of family justice?" I smiled faintly, looking down at my calloused hands. "I don't see myself as any symbol. I'm just a father who learned that sometimes. To save your child, you have to let them fall." The studio fell silent. Even the host seemed unable to speak. "Justice isn't revenge," I continued. "Justice is when the truth is spoken, and the one who's wrong finally dares to face the mirror without fear." That clip reached 8 million views within days. Thousands of letters poured in, from strangers, from parents, from people who'd stayed silent for too long. "You made me believe goodness still exists. Thank you for giving me the courage to tell my son the truth." After one interview, Samantha turned to me, smiling softly. "You know, Mr. Monroe, sometimes justice doesn't win in court. It wins in the hearts of people." I nodded. Yes, real justice only matters if it doesn't kill compassion. Still, Elizabeth never left my thoughts. Rumors said she had left the city, sold her condo, moved to a small coastal town in the south. She'd taken a job with a nonprofit teaching financial literacy to single mothers. No one knew if it was redemption or escape, but for me, it was enough to know she was still standing. One afternoon, as I watered the garden, a plain envelope arrived in the mail. No return address. Inside was an old photo. The three of us, Mary, Elizabeth, and me, smiling in front of the house. On the back, in shaky handwriting, "I'm sorry. Thank you for not leaving me in the dark." I stood there for a long while. The late sunlight fell across the garden, across the photograph, across my trembling hands. I looked up at the sky and whispered, "Mary, maybe our girl has finally found her way home." That evening, I appeared on television one last time. When the red light blinked on, I looked straight into the camera. If anyone is listening, remember this: families don't fall apart because of mistakes. They fall apart when we refuse to forgive. I told the truth not to win, but so my daughter could have a chance to be good again. The host wiped away tears. I smiled gently, closing with the final words I had carried in my heart all along. True justice isn't found in a verdict. It's found in a heart brave enough to forgive. The morning of the hearing, Charleston was cloaked in gray clouds. The wind carried the damp scent of last night's rain. I climbed the courthouse steps slowly, clutching Mary's old fabric hat in one hand. Inside me, there was no anger left, only a heavy calm that felt like the end of something long and painful. The courtroom was packed. Journalists, photographers, and strangers filled every bench, every pair of eyes fixed on us, a father and a daughter seated on opposite sides of the room. Elizabeth entered quietly, dressed in a simple black dress, hair tied back, no makeup. The confidence and sharpness were gone. She sat still, eyes lowered, hands clasped tightly in her lap. Beside her was Henderson, the once brash attorney who now looked tense and subdued, as if he already knew there was nowhere left to retreat. Across from them, Samantha spread out her papers. Her expression was fierce, but her tone carried something deeply human. "Mr. Monroe," she said softly, "we don't need to win today. We just need to tell the truth, and let the court do the rest." "I've been silent for 12 years," I murmured. "Today, Mary deserves to hear the truth." The judge entered. The gavel struck once, bang, echoing through the room like thunder. "The Civil Court of Charleston is now in session for the case of Albert Monroe versus Elizabeth Monroe on the charges of forgery and unlawful appropriation of property." Henderson stood first. His voice was polite, controlled, but his hands betrayed him, trembling slightly at his side. "Your Honor, the defendant acknowledges procedural errors, but insists there was no criminal intent. Her actions were motivated by concern for the preservation of family property, not by greed." A neat, rehearsed speech, yet hollow, like the shell of something that once carried conviction. Then Samantha rose. She straightened her jacket and spoke clearly, each word deliberate. "Your Honor, the plaintiff does not seek money nor punishment. He seeks only the restoration of truth, and the dignity that was stolen when a daughter erased her father's name from his own home." The sound of typing from the reporters' desks filled the silence. Then Samantha began her presentation, piece by piece, calm and precise. The forensic report proving the forged signature. The bank's surveillance footage showing Elizabeth and Marcus signing the deed. And finally, Mary's original will. The definitive evidence. When the forged signature appeared on the large courtroom screen, a murmur rippled through the audience. Elizabeth's shoulders trembled. She lowered her head, hands tightening until her knuckles turned white. Then it was my turn to take the stand. "Mr. Monroe," the judge asked, "do you wish to say anything to the defendant before the court?" I turned to Elizabeth. She looked up, eyes red, full of fear and shame. I drew a slow breath. "I don't want to prove my daughter guilty," I said quietly. "I just want to prove that no one, not even the ones we love, should build their happiness on buried truth." The courtroom fell utterly silent. Only the soft clack of the clerk's pen filled the air, mingling with the faint whistle of wind outside. "I've lost my wife, my home, and nearly my faith in people," I continued. "But I still hope my daughter can find the goodness that's left inside her." Samantha touched my shoulder gently, a silent signal that I'd said enough. Then Henderson called Elizabeth to testify. She rose, trembling, her voice barely audible. I never meant for it to go this far," she stammered. "I just wanted to handle things quickly. I didn't know Dad still had Mom's original papers." The judge leaned forward. "Miss Monroe, do you admit to forging your father's signature?" There was a long pause. A single tear fell onto the wooden floor. "Yes, but I didn't mean to steal. I was just afraid of losing everything." Her words broke the silence like the snap of an old branch in the wind. The judge nodded slowly. "The court has heard enough. We will recess for 15 minutes before delivering the verdict." I stepped into the hallway. Sunlight filtered through the tall windows, scattering across the marble floor. Samantha sat beside me, calm but smiling faintly. "Whatever the outcome," she said, "you've already won, Mr. Monroe. You showed her what truth looks like." I shook my head. "No. I just hope she remembers what I once taught her, that no victory born from deceit can ever last." Across the corridor, Elizabeth sat alone on a bench, head bowed, hands clasped. No cameras, no reporters, no whispers, just a daughter waiting for a verdict, one that would decide not her freedom, but the rest of her soul. 15 minutes passed like an eternity. The gavel struck again, sharp, final. Everyone rose as the judge returned to the bench. No one spoke. No camera clicked. The air was thick with the gravity of what was about to end. The judge adjusted his glasses, looked down at the thick file before him, and began reading slowly, his voice deep and deliberate. "After reviewing all evidence, witness testimonies, and the forensic findings, this court concludes: 1. The property transfer under the name of Mr. Albert Monroe is found to be forged and legally void. 2. The defendant, Miss Elizabeth Monroe, is guilty of falsification and use of fraudulent documents for the purpose of unlawful gain. 3. However, considering her confession, remorse, and the absence of major financial harm, the court will not pursue criminal charges. She is hereby ordered to issue a public apology to the plaintiff, restore his legal ownership, and reinstate his reputation." The words hung in the air like thunder after a storm. No one moved. Henderson lowered his head, silent. Elizabeth stood frozen, then slowly turned toward me. Her eyes, once sharp with ambition, now glimmered with fear and heartbreak. "Dad," she whispered, voice trembling. "I'm sorry. I don't deserve to be your daughter." I looked at her, and for the first time felt no anger, only the dull, familiar ache of a wound reopening after too many years. "Elizabeth," I said quietly, my voice rough with age, "I don't need you to kneel or beg. I just need you to understand. One lie can take a lifetime to repair." She broke down, collapsing to her knees in the center of the courtroom. Reporters looked away. A few lowered their cameras. One or two quietly wiped their eyes. The judge tapped his gavel again, his own voice shaking slightly, a rare crack in a man trained for impartiality. "Ms. Monroe, remember this. Justice is not just punishment. It's a second chance. Don't waste it." When the proceedings ended, Samantha stood up. "Your Honor, if I may, I'd like to make a brief statement on behalf of my client." The judge nodded. Samantha turned to the room. Her voice was clear, firm but warm, wrapping the air like sunlight breaking through clouds. "What we've witnessed today is not a victory. It's a lesson. A father chose justice over silence, not to destroy his daughter, but to save what was left of her conscience. And a daughter, though she erred, found the courage to stand here and admit the truth before the world. This was never a case about property. It was a case about family, about truth chosen over deceit, and forgiveness chosen over hate." No one moved, no typing, no cameras. Just silence, deep and heavy, the kind that follows revelation. Samantha bowed her head slightly, her voice softening to a near whisper. "I believe that after today, these tears we see are not the end, but the beginning of a father and daughter finding their way back to each other, in the light of truth." Applause broke out, hesitant at first, then swelling into a wave that filled the room. A young reporter murmured to his colleague, "It's the first time I've seen the winner of a trial bow lower than the loser." I turned toward Samantha and gave her a quiet nod. She answered with a small, serene smile, the smile of someone who had fought not just for law, but for humanity. When most had left the courtroom, Elizabeth remained seated, head bowed. I walked to her slowly and placed something into her hands. Mary's old fabric hat, the only thing I'd carried with me that day. "Your mother once said," I told her gently, "that whoever can bow to the truth can stand tall before their conscience. Keep it, Elizabeth. It's the one piece of her you haven't lost." She held it close, pressing it to her chest as her tears darkened the worn fabric. I turned and walked toward the exit, sunlight streaming through the courthouse windows. thin but golden, enough to illuminate two souls who had both, at last, stepped out of the dark. When I stepped out of the courthouse, the late afternoon sun washed everything in a golden haze. Hundreds stood along the steps, not shouting, not cheering, just clapping. Slow, measured, respectful. A middle-aged woman approached me, her eyes red. She took my hand. "Mr. Albert, I lost my husband to our son's greed. But today, because of you, I believe truth can still save people." I squeezed her hand gently. "Keep faith in what's right," I said. "What's right will save you in return." Samantha followed behind me, letting me walk at my own pace. The reporters surged forward, microphones in hand. "Mr. Monroe, do you have anything you'd like to say to the public?" I stopped, the sunlight catching in my tired eyes. "No, there's nothing more to say. The court has already spoken for me." A soft breeze drifted through. For the first time in years, I felt peace. Not the peace of victory, but of closure. The peace that comes when a wound finally stops bleeding, stitched together by truth. Inside, Elizabeth still sat alone. The court had just delivered a supplemental ruling. Her management rights were suspended for 5 years. She was ordered to join a rehabilitation program, working with nonprofit groups that assist the elderly defrauded by their own families. Henderson turned as if to speak, but Elizabeth raised a trembling hand to stop him. "Thank you," she whispered, "but I don't need a lawyer anymore. I need to learn how to be human again." When the courtroom emptied, she stood walking into the quiet hallway. Sunlight streamed through the glass panes, lighting her tear-streaked face. Outside, reporters still waited, cameras ready. But she didn't hide. "Ms. Monroe," one shouted, "do you have anything to say to your father?" She paused at the top of the courthouse steps. Her voice shook, but every word was clear. "My father was right. The truth doesn't destroy you. It just shows you how lost you've been." Then she turned and walked away. No car, no entourage. Just a lone young woman, descending the stone steps with her mother's worn fabric hat in her arms, the only thing she had left to carry. A gust of wind lifted her hair. In the fading light, her shadow stretched long, thin and fragile, like a thread between guilt and redemption. That evening, the nightly news aired a brief clip. I stood at the gate of my home, saying nothing, just watching the oak trees sway in the wind. The anchor's voice filled the room. "The Monroe case has concluded. Mr. Albert Monroe, the father who sought justice, has declined all interviews, saying only that he wishes to return to his garden and his memories." Meanwhile, Miss Elizabeth Monroe, once a rising star in finance, left Charleston this morning to begin a new chapter of her life. The report ended with soft, solemn music, the kind that hurts, yet soothes. That night, I sat on the porch, beneath a sky thick with stars. The air smelled of damp earth and old wood. For the first time in years, I could breathe without the weight of bitterness pressing down. A letter waited on the table beside me, Elizabeth's handwriting, just a few shaky lines. "Dad, I won't ask for forgiveness. I only ask to learn how to love again. I know justice has won, but because of you, I finally understand that forgiveness is the hardest part of justice." I folded the letter slowly, a faint smile on my lips. "You're right, Liz," I murmured. "But you're walking the right path now." I looked up toward the old oak where Mary once hung her swing. In the moonlight, I imagined her standing there, smiling, gentle-eyed, like she used to. "You see, Mary," I whispered, "justice didn't pull us apart. It helped her find her way home." Moonlight spilled across the porch, glinting off the framed photo of the three of us on the wall. I placed my hand over it and spoke softly. "Family. No matter how far we fall, it's where we return in the end." Outside, the wind brushed the petals of a late-blooming rose. The night was still. Justice had been served. And in that stillness, I realized, forgiveness is the most beautiful sentence a father can ever deliver. 3 months after the verdict, Charleston had slipped back into its usual rhythm. The Monroe trial had vanished from the headlines. New scandals, new faces filled the evening news. But for Elizabeth, the storm hadn't passed. It had simply changed shape. It no longer came from flashing cameras or reporters' questions, but from the quiet, judgmental stares of strangers. The morning she left her last apartment downtown, rain fell in a thin, unbroken veil. She stood before the mirror, no longer the immaculate woman in a tailored suit who once silenced trading floors with a single glance. What stared back at her now was someone else entirely, hair tied hastily, eyes sunken from sleepless nights, a faint smile that trembled as if trying to hide the cracks spreading deep inside her. She packed what little she had left, a worn notebook, an old photograph of her parents and herself as a child, and Mary's faded cloth hat, the only thing her father had placed in her hands the day the court set them free in two very different ways. As her fingers brushed the frayed fabric, a tear slid down, soaking into it, as though she were trying to cleanse something no one else could see. Elizabeth moved to Seabrook, a small coastal town 200 miles south of Charleston. Her new home was a weathered wooden cabin with paint peeling off its walls and a single window that looked out toward the sea. The sound of waves crashing became her companion, relentless, unending, like the memory of everything she wanted to forget. The only job she could find was part-time bookkeeping for a nonprofit called Second Path Foundation, an organization that helped elderly victims of financial fraud. The irony was sharp. Every day she had to face the very pain she had once caused her own father. On her first day, an old woman sat across from her, weeping softly as she told her story, how her son had emptied her savings account and disappeared. Elizabeth listened in silence, hands trembling slightly. When the woman finished, Elizabeth whispered, "Sometimes the ones we love most hurt us the deepest, but if they still know regret, then they're not completely lost." The old woman studied her quietly. "You speak like someone who's lived it." Elizabeth lowered her eyes. "Because I was the one who did it." The woman reached across the table, her wrinkled hand warm on Elizabeth's. "Then live well, child. Live well enough that no one else ever has to make your mistake." From that day on, Elizabeth threw herself into her work. She spoke little, worked late, and took the hardest cases. Her co-workers were wary at first. Whispers followed her name. But slowly, they began to see something in her that no one expected. A quiet, relentless devotion. She stayed long after closing hours, organizing files by the dim glow of a desk lamp. She gave part of her meager paycheck to help an old man buy back his foreclosed home. And though she never talked about herself, everyone sensed that her kindness came from a place far deeper than guilt. It came from a need to make something right. One night, as rain tapped softly against the window, she sat alone at her desk. The yellow light fell across an old photo of her mother, the same smiling portrait her father had once kept by his bedside. Elizabeth whispered, almost afraid of the sound of her own voice, "Mom, I destroyed everything. But if you can see me now, I hope you know I'm trying, even if I have to rebuild from ashes." Outside, the wind rose, rattling the window frame. She closed the ledger, resting her head on folded arms. For the first time in months, her tears didn't burn. They cleansed. A few weeks later, on an early October morning, Elizabeth stood on a street corner handing out flyers for a free financial counseling session. A middle-aged woman approached her, studying her face. "Excuse me, you're Elizabeth Monroe, aren't you?" Elizabeth froze. Her pulse quickened. "Yes," she said quietly. "Don't worry," the woman said, smiling gently. "I'm not here to judge you. I used to be your father's neighbor. He's doing well. Volunteers at the senior center now. Sometimes he talks about you. Says she's finding her way back. Just a little farther than I thought she'd have to go." Elizabeth blinked hard, her vision blurring. He really said that?" "He did. He said if you're trying to live right, then he can rest easy." The woman pressed a slip of paper into her hand, the address of the community center where Albert taught. Elizabeth stood there in the sea breeze, the paper trembling between her fingers. For months she had been running from his gaze, but maybe it was time to stop running. Not to beg for forgiveness, but to finally say the words she'd never dared to. "I understand now, Dad." She looked out toward the ocean. The horizon glowed orange with the rising sun. A single tear slid down her cheek. But this time, it didn't taste of shame. It tasted of beginning. 2 months after meeting her father's old neighbor, Elizabeth finally decided to return to Charleston. Not in the back seat of a sleek car, but on a long-distance bus. Cracked vinyl seats, the faint smell of plastic, the steady hum of the engine cutting through the night. She sat by the window, watching the highway lights slip past like moments from another life. In her hand was a handwritten letter, folded neatly. The pen strokes were steady, careful, nothing like the hurried scrawl she once had when her life moved too fast to pause. The first line read, "Dad, I'm not coming to ask for forgiveness. I'm coming to leave you the truth. That I finally understand what you tried to teach me, even if it's taken me a lifetime. She tucked the letter into her coat pocket and held her mother's old cloth hat close against her chest. When the bus pulled into Charleston at dawn, the city was veiled in mist. The rising sun spilled through the haze like a thin curtain between past and present. The St. Clair Community Center sat on the city's edge, a place where seniors came to learn basic computing, online banking, or simply to talk and feel seen. When Elizabeth arrived, she stopped at the gate, her heart thudded in her chest. Through the window, she saw him. Albert sat at the front of the small classroom, whiteboard marker in hand, showing a group of elderly students how to spot fraudulent emails. His hair was grayer now, but his voice, calm, grounded, unmistakably kind, carried through the room. "You see," he said, smiling gently, "sometimes the ones who deceive us wear the faces we once trusted most. But don't let fear win. Don't let anger grow roots. We can't stop others from being wrong, but we can choose not to let their mistakes destroy our faith in what's right." Applause rippled through the class. He bowed slightly, that quiet, humble smile lighting his face. Elizabeth gripped the iron gate, her knuckles white. Tears welled up, blurring her view. She had never seen her father so at peace, not the man broken by betrayal, but a man who had learned how to live again. She whispered, voice trembling, "Dad, I understand now. Justice isn't just a verdict. It's the way you taught me to love again." She didn't enter the classroom. She waited until the lesson ended, until the last of the seniors shuffled out, before she walked quietly around to the back courtyard. There, by a wooden bench where her father often sat to read, she placed a white envelope. On it she had written simply, "For Dad, from Elizabeth." Beside it she laid down Mary's hat, folded neatly, and a sprig of dried lavender, the flower her mother once grew in front of their old porch. She stood for a long moment, eyes glistening. "I've kept it long enough, Mom," she whispered. "Now it's time it went home." Then she turned and walked away, not daring to look back. Minutes later, the door creaked open. Albert stepped out, holding a steaming cup of tea. When he saw the bench, he froze. His trembling hands reached for the hat, the lavender, the envelope. He opened the letter. Elizabeth's handwriting flowed across the page, calm, steady, almost serene. "Dad, I used to think justice was about punishment, that it ended when someone paid a price. But I know now. Real justice is when the hurt find the strength to live with kindness again. You were the only person I ever truly hurt. And yet, you're the only one who never shut the door on me. I won't ask for forgiveness. I haven't earned it. But please don't forget, I'm still your daughter, even after doing the worst a child can do. I'll keep working in Seabrook, helping those who lost what I once tried to steal, their trust. Every elderly person I protect is a piece of my debt repaid. Thank you, Dad, for saving me, with both justice and mercy. I love you. Elizabeth." Albert sat down slowly, letter trembling in his hands. The scent of lavender drifted through the air, mingling with the damp earth after rain. He lifted his gaze toward the sky, where seagulls traced white arcs against the brightening blue. "Mary," he whispered, his voice breaking softly, "our little girl finally learned to bow her head." That evening, no one knew Elizabeth had come back. But the next morning, the janitor told others that Mr. Monroe had arrived earlier than usual. He'd sat on that same bench for a long time, eyes calm, a faint, peaceful smile at the corners of his lips, the kind of smile a man wears when his heart, at last, is whole again. Spring returned to Seabrook like a whispered promise. Lavender fields along the coast bloomed again, painting soft streaks of purple across the dunes. Elizabeth still lived in her small seaside room, the same wooden walls, the same window that opened to the sea. Every morning she walked the shoreline barefoot, letting the waves wash over her feet as the wind carried the scent of salt and wildflowers. At Second Path Foundation, she was no longer just the quiet accountant in the corner. Now she taught small classes on safe financial practices for seniors. Every week, she sat among silver-haired faces, tracing numbers on the whiteboard with calm patience, explaining how to spot false investments and phishing emails. One afternoon, after class, an elderly man touched her hand gently. "You speak," he said, "like someone who's lost something precious, and found it again through kindness." Elizabeth smiled softly. because loss is the only teacher that makes you value what really matters. The people of Seabrook grew to trust her, to admire her quiet steadiness. They didn't know her past, only that she never refused a plea for help, never accepted payment, and always treated each person with a care that came from somewhere deep and raw. At night, when the office lights dimmed, Elizabeth stayed behind. Her journal filled with names, dozens of seniors she'd helped recover savings or peace of mind. Every name felt like a small absolution, every page a little lighter than the last. Then, one late summer afternoon, as she was closing up her desk, the postman came in. "Ms. Monroe, you've got mail. From Charleston." Her pulse quickened. The envelope bore a familiar, slightly shaky handwriting, her father's. She opened it carefully, as though afraid it might dissolve in her hands. Inside was a single yellowed page, the ink faint but strong enough to reach her heart. "My dear Elizabeth, I read your letter and held it for many weeks. I didn't reply right away. I needed to be sure your words came from truth, not guilt. Now I know they did. The caretaker told me you came back, that you left your mother's hat and a note. Every morning when I hold that hat, I can almost see Mary smiling again. My daughter, guilt cannot be erased, but it can be redeemed through a different way of living. I see now that you're walking that path. If your mother were here, she would say, forgiveness isn't forgetting, it's choosing love over pain. I've chosen the same. I forgive you. Not because you are my daughter, but because you have earned forgiveness. I am proud of you, Liz. Live peacefully. You have nothing left to prove, except that goodness can be born from ruin. With love, Dad. Albert." Her vision blurred as tears fell onto the page, staining the ink. She pressed the letter to her chest, holding it as if afraid the wind would steal away the only thing she had ever truly needed. Outside, a soft sea breeze drifted through the open window, carrying with it the scent of lavender. Elizabeth smiled through her tears. "I hear you, Dad," she whispered. "I'll live in a way that honors that forgiveness." From that day, she began teaching an additional class, finance and integrity, for young professionals just starting out. She told her own story, unflinching, unedited. "I once lost everything for a single word, greed," she said. "But the person I hurt most was the one who saved me, not through anger, but forgiveness. If you learn that now, you'll never have to walk through the fire I did." The classroom was silent. Then quiet applause, not loud but sincere, filled the room. A year later, at the Foundation's annual ceremony, her name was called. Elizabeth Monroe, Employee of the Year. She rose to the podium to accept the certificate. As she stepped down, a boy of 12 ran up and handed her a small bouquet. "Miss Elizabeth," he said, "my mom said you helped my grandma keep her house. Thank you." Elizabeth knelt, smiling, tears glistening in her eyes. "Thank you, sweetheart, but you should thank your dad instead. It was a father who taught me how to love again." That evening she returned to her small cottage by the sea. The sky was a watercolor of violet and gold. She opened her father's letter once more, read it slowly, and placed it in a small glass frame beside a photo of him and her mother. The fading sunlight spilled across the wall, catching the glass and scattering it into soft golden reflections, like a pair of unseen arms embracing her. "I've been forgiven," she whispered, her voice calm and steady. "And now, I forgive myself too." Outside, the sea sang its endless song, waves folding gently onto the shore. The air was warm, the world quiet. A dark chapter had ended. Elizabeth Monroe, once a symbol of betrayal, had become a quiet light for others lost in their own shadows. And somewhere far away, perhaps under the same lavender sky, Albert Monroe was smiling, because justice had done its work, and mercy had made it whole. Nights in Seabrook were usually silent, the kind of silence where you could hear the clock tick in the dark, but for Elizabeth, every night was a battlefield, between sleep and memory. A year had passed since her quiet return to life, and on the surface it looked as if she'd found peace. But true remorse doesn't come when the punishment ends. It arrives later, quietly, mercilessly, when no one's watching. When there's no more noise left to drown it out. It started with the dreams. She would wake drenched in sweat, chest heaving, after seeing the same vision again and again. She walked into their old house in Charleston. Her mother stood in the kitchen, humming softly. Her father sat on the porch, reading the newspaper. Both of them smiled when she entered, until one by one they faded into smoke. Her mother's voice always lingered the longest. "My daughter, why did you trade love for loneliness?" And before she could answer, the dream would dissolve, leaving her sobbing into the pillow. Every time it ended the same way, her father's figure walking away into the light, silent, distant, final. By day, Elizabeth went through the motions. She worked, she smiled, she helped the elderly organize their papers. But every time someone mentioned the word father, something in her chest twisted. One afternoon, an old woman came to her office to withdraw a legal complaint against her only son. "I was angry," the woman said, eyes red and wet. "But I don't want to die with him thinking his mother hated him." Elizabeth froze. She sat down beside the woman and whispered, her throat tight. "You don't hate him. You're just hurt." The woman looked at her, calm and perceptive. "Have you forgiven anyone yet, dear?" Elizabeth's pen stopped midair. Her lips parted, but no sound came out. And she only managed a faint, broken smile before signing the form, her hand trembling so badly the ink bled across the page. That night she opened the drawer beside her bed and took out her father's letter. She read it for what must have been the 100th time, tracing the words with her fingertips. But when she reached the line, "I forgive you because you deserve forgiveness," she broke. "No, Dad," she whispered through tears. "I don't deserve it. I destroyed the one person who loved me most. How could I ever deserve to be forgiven?" Her sobs mixed with the ocean wind outside. Waves pounded against the shore, relentless, as if the sea itself was answering her. In the following weeks, she began writing a journal. Not about her work, but about her reckoning. Every entry was a letter, to her father, her mother, and the self she'd once been. "Mom, I wish I'd stopped. I wish I'd listened when Dad called my name. Dad, I'm scared. Scared that you'll die before I've redeemed even a fraction of what I took from you. Forgiving myself feels harder than being punished, because I have to live every day with the memory of what I did." Her handwriting was unsteady, blotched with tears. But after each entry, she felt a strange lightness. Not relief, but release. As if confession wasn't a chain anymore, but a slow unburdening of the heart. One night after a long day at work, she walked alone to the beach. The moon hung high, spilling silver light across the restless sea. She slipped off her shoes and stepped into the wet sand, letting each wave wash over her ankles, colder, cleaner than before. She whispered into the wind, "Mom, Dad, I'm done running. I know I can't undo what I did, but I'll live the rest of my life making sure my mistakes mean something." A larger wave surged up, soaking her to the knees, but this time she didn't step back. She smiled instead, closed her eyes, and let the ocean take her weight for a moment. She could feel every sound, the crash of water, her own heartbeat, the wind threading through her hair. And for the first time in years, she wasn't afraid of silence. The next morning, her co-workers noticed something different. Her smile was warmer. Her eyes, once guarded, now carried a quiet steadiness. "Miss Elizabeth," a young volunteer asked, "what's your secret? You look lighter." She laughed softly. "There's no secret," she said. "You just have to face yourself and stop hating who you were." That night, she wrote one final line in her journal before closing it. "Forgiving yourself. That's the first step toward being alive again." She looked up at the framed photo of her parents on the desk. Moonlight poured through the window, soft and golden, casting a glow over her face. For the first time since she could remember, the night didn't feel heavy. It felt like an embrace, gentle, forgiving, endless. Winter came early to Seabrook. The waves grew wilder, and the wind howled through the cracks of her little wooden home, making the walls tremble like a living thing. Elizabeth still kept her nightly ritual, writing in her journal, but lately her entries had changed. They were no longer confessions of guilt. They were fragments of memory, woven with pieces of dreams, part real, part imagined. The dreams had grown stranger. She saw a white house nestled among rolling lavender hills, her mother's laughter in the distance, her father reading on the porch. In the dream, she never dared to step inside. She only watched from afar, afraid that if she got closer, they'd disappear again. And every time she woke, her heart ached, but not with despair. It was a quiet, cleansing ache, like the sea smoothing the edges of a jagged stone. Then, one stormy night, she dreamt she was lost in a fog that stretched endlessly over the sea. And from somewhere ahead, a soft voice called her name. "Liz, you've wandered too far, haven't you?" She turned, and there stood Mary, small, graceful, her silver hair tied neatly back, smiling the same gentle smile from old family photos. Elizabeth fell to her knees, tears streaming down her face. "Mom, I'm so sorry. I hurt Dad. I betrayed everything you taught me." Mary reached out, stroking her daughter's hair, her voice calm as the tide. "I know, sweetheart, but mistakes don't kill the soul. Refusing to forgive yourself does." "I can't," Elizabeth whispered. "Every time I think of Dad, I see what I did." "That's because you're still looking with the eyes of your past," her mother said. "Try seeing through the eyes of tomorrow." Elizabeth looked up through her tears. "Tomorrow? Is there still a tomorrow for me?" "Always," Mary smiled. "If you dare to believe you're still worthy of love." And then, from behind her, another hand, warm, familiar, rested gently on her shoulder. She turned, and there he was. Albert. His hair was silver white, his eyes kind, his presence radiant but steady. "Dad." Her voice broke. "I'm scared. I don't know when I'll stop feeling haunted." "Fear never leaves, Liz," he said softly. "It just grows smaller when you start living for others. You've done that. You've helped people who might have lost everything, just like I almost did. So why can't you forgive the one person who made that possible?" She broke down, burying her face against his chest like a lost child finally found. "Dad, I've missed you. I've missed both of you so much." "We never left, sweetheart," he murmured. "Every time you help someone, that's us, living through you." Elizabeth looked around. The fog had lifted. All around her, lavender fields swayed in the golden light. The air shimmered, the ocean beyond, calm and wide. Her mother's voice floated to her one last time. "It's time to go home, Elizabeth. Back to the light. Back to your life." As the glow brightened, both figures began to fade. Her father's final words lingered in the air. "Forgive yourself, Liz. That's the one thing I could never do for you." She gasped awake. Dawn light spilled across the room. The sound of waves filled the silence, steady and gentle. Tears rolled down her cheeks, but this time she was smiling. The heaviness in her chest was gone. No more suffocating guilt, no more invisible chains, only stillness, pure and tender, like morning air. She stepped out onto the balcony. The wind was cold, biting at her skin, carrying the salt of the sea. On the horizon, the first rays of sunlight pierced the clouds, painting the sky in soft gold. "I forgive me, Dad," she whispered. At last. From that day forward, Elizabeth changed. Her laughter came easier. Her voice grew warmer, and sometimes during her workshops she spoke to the young people who had lost their way. "When you make a mistake," she told them, "the world doesn't end. It just restarts. The moment you decide to be honest with yourself, I'm living proof." A young man raised his hand. "Ms. Monroe, have you really forgiven yourself?" She smiled, the kind of smile that held no shadow. "Yes, and when you finally forgive yourself, you learn how to love others the right way." That evening, she returned home and opened her journal one last time. For years, every entry had begun with the same words. "Today, I regret." But tonight, she wrote something new. "Today, I'm grateful." She closed the book and stepped out onto the balcony. The ocean was calm. Stars glittered like threads of silver across the dark sky. She spoke softly into the night, her voice carried by the wind. "Mom, Dad, I'm doing fine. This time, I'll keep my promise." A single shooting star streaked across the sky, and standing there beneath its brief and beautiful light, Elizabeth Monroe smiled, the smile of someone who had finally set herself free. 3 years after leaving Charleston, the name Elizabeth Monroe appeared in the headlines again, But this time, it wasn't followed by words like fraud, betrayal, or disgrace. Now, people called her the woman who teaches a new generation how to rise after falling. From a volunteer accountant in Seabrook, Elizabeth had become a keynote speaker for a program called Second Path, a series of workshops for young people who had once made mistakes in finance, ethics, or relationships. She didn't use flashy slides or polished scripts. She didn't tell other people's stories. She told her own, in a calm voice, sometimes trembling, but always carrying a quiet, undeniable power. I once lost everything: my reputation, my family, and the trust of the father I loved most. I chose money over love, and that decision turned me into the shadow of who I used to be. But there was one person, the very one I hurt the most, who chose forgiveness over resentment. And I realized then, forgiveness isn't forgetting, it's opening a door so that someone else can walk back into the light. The room fell silent. In the back row, a young woman began to cry. A man lowered his head, hiding the tears gathering in his eyes. Elizabeth stepped down from the stage and walked among them, her voice soft. I don't tell my story to be pitied. I tell it so you'll know this. Your mistakes don't end your life. They begin the most honest part of it. After every talk, people lined up to meet her. Some said, "Your story gave me the courage to call my father after 10 years. Others wrote letters. Because of you, I finally understand. Forgiveness isn't weakness. It's strength." Elizabeth kept all those letters in a small wooden box. Tucked beneath them was her father's letter, the compass she carried everywhere she went. On the nights she felt weary after long travels, she would sit by the hotel window and read the same line over and over again. Forgive yourself. That's the one thing I could never do for you. Each time she smiled, because now she wasn't living to atone. She was living to shine that same light of grace for others. One humid June morning, Elizabeth received an invitation that made her heart pause. A speaking event in Charleston. When she stepped off the plane, the familiar air wrapped around her like an old memory. She looked out across the skyline. The courthouse still stood, once her personal hell, now just another white building swallowed by the city's new life. Before her talk, she visited St. Clair Community Center, where her father once taught financial literacy to seniors. The classroom was still there. The old wooden chair still sat by the window, and on the desk was a framed photograph of Albert Monroe, beneath which read, "The man who taught this city that justice cannot exist without compassion." Elizabeth placed a small bouquet of fresh lavender before the frame and whispered, "Dad, I'm home, but this time, I'm not here to apologize. I'm here to continue what you began." A gentle breeze slipped through the open window, making the lavender sway. She closed her eyes and felt it, a warmth on her shoulder, like a hand she still knew. That afternoon, she stood before hundreds of people inside the renovated hall, the very room that had once been her courtroom. Now it bore a new name, Stories of Redemption. The spotlight fell softly across her face, calm, radiant, unafraid. Once I stood in this very room, not to share my truth, but to defend my lies. Today I stand here again, not to erase the past, but to thank it. Because only through darkness did I learn how precious the light truly is. Applause erupted, rising like a wave. Elizabeth bowed her head, eyes glistening. She knew in that moment that the circle was complete, from betrayal to judgment to remorse, and finally to rebirth through truth and compassion. After the speech in Charleston, everything seemed to ignite again. Hundreds of letters poured in, messages of gratitude, people asking to volunteer, to join the Second Path program. What began as a small community effort in Seabrook quickly grew into a nationwide foundation. Elizabeth partnered with schools, churches, and community centers across the country. On the foundation's banner, she had a single line printed, simple but profound: "Give second chances, not only to those who made mistakes, but to those who were hurt by them." Over the next 3 years, Elizabeth traveled from the rural towns of Louisiana to the industrial neighborhoods of Chicago. Every stop brought a new story: a father who hadn't spoken to his son in a decade, a young woman who once embezzled money, now volunteering for free to earn back trust, a former inmate who opened a small class to teach orphans life skills. Elizabeth listened to them all, taking notes, offering hugs, and whispering, "I've been where you are. We can't rewrite the past, but we can begin again." through truth. Under her guidance, Second Path grew rapidly. By its fifth year, the foundation had helped over 1,200 people rebuild their lives. News outlets called her the woman of redeemed souls. But Elizabeth only smiled and said softly, "I'm just repaying a debt to life and to love." One crisp October morning, as she prepared for the Foundation's 5th anniversary celebration, a letter arrived, hand-delivered with no sender's name. The only clue was a Charleston postmark. Inside was a slightly yellowed card that smelled faintly of smoke and a photograph, her father, Albert Monroe, smiling among a group of elderly students at the St. Clair Center. On the back, a few lines in careful handwriting. "My name is Reverend Thomas, your father's close friend. Albert passed away a year ago, peacefully in his sleep. Before he left, he asked me to hold on to something for you, and to send it only when I believed you'd truly found peace. I think that time has come." Elizabeth's hands trembled as she opened the small package that came with it. Inside was an old brown leather bracelet engraved with words she knew by heart. "The truth sets you free." It was her father's bracelet, the one he had worn for years. Her eyes filled with tears, but not of grief. They were tears of release. "Dad," she whispered, voice breaking. "I think I finally am free." That evening, during the anniversary celebration, Elizabeth stood on stage before hundreds of volunteers and supporters. She held up the bracelet, her voice steady but thick with emotion. "This bracelet belonged to the man who taught me the greatest lesson of my life, that justice isn't meant to punish, but to heal. I received it today, not as a reward, but as a reminder that every truth, no matter how painful, carries within it the seed of compassion." The hall erupted into applause, not loud or frantic, but deep and resonant, like a collective heartbeat. An older volunteer leaned toward the person beside him and murmured, "Now I understand why she can heal others, because she was healed by justice itself." Elizabeth bowed her head, placed a hand over her heart, and whispered, more to the heavens than the crowd, "Thank you, Dad. I'll keep walking your path, with truth and with love." The last sunset of that year painted Seabrook's shore in soft amber light. Elizabeth stood alone on the sand, the same place where her new life had quietly begun. The ocean stretched endlessly before her, calm and steady, whispering against the wind. In her hand was the old leather bracelet, the one engraved with her father's words. She traced the letters gently, as if feeling his warmth through time. She took a deep breath, then began to speak, not to anyone in particular, but to the world itself. "I used to believe justice meant punishing those who did wrong, but now I know. True justice is when the guilty find the courage to face themselves, and the wounded find the grace to let go before hate consumes them." She bent down, picked up a small stone, and tossed it into the sea. The ripples spread outward, quiet, endless. "I once lost my father, not because he left me, but because I turned away from the truth. And the cruelest irony is that he was the one who brought me back. Not with anger, but with forgiveness." Forgiveness. It sounds fragile, doesn't it? But it's the only strength powerful enough to lift us above our own mistakes. She looked toward the horizon, where the light was fading into gold. If you've ever been betrayed, ever been hurt, ever felt abandoned by someone you love, remember this. You have every right to grieve, every right to be angry. But don't let hatred turn you into the same kind of person who hurt you. The truth might cost you everything, but it will give you back the one thing that truly matters, yourself. She fell silent, then reached into her coat pocket and pulled out a worn photograph, a picture of her father, her mother, and a little girl smiling between them. She knelt, placing the photo on the sand where the tide reached her feet. "Dad, Mom, I understand now. Family isn't just where we're born, it's where we're forgiven, trusted, and loved, even after we've failed." A gentle wave swept over the photograph, pulling it slowly out to sea. Elizabeth didn't cry. She simply smiled, a soft, peaceful smile that carried both farewell and freedom. "Thank you for teaching me that family isn't blood. It's respect. It's love." She turned and began walking along the shoreline. Above her, a flock of seagulls soared across the fading sky, their cries mingling with the rhythm of the waves, a chorus from the past bidding her onward. In the distance, the sun dipped below the waterline, but the horizon still glowed, a thin band of golden light, like forgiveness itself, lingering long after the storm. Later that evening, during her final recorded interview, Elizabeth looked straight into the camera, voice steady and clear. If you're hearing this, remember, none of us are perfect, but each of us can choose to be better, to tell the truth. To forgive, even if the person who needs forgiveness most is yourself. She paused, eyes shimmering in the soft studio light. Because in the end, family isn't who shares your blood, it's who still holds your hand when you fall. And if my story makes you think of someone you once hurt, call them today. A gentle smile crossed her face, whole, unbroken, free. The bracelet on her wrist glimmered in the last trace of twilight. Stay with me on this journey, she whispered, voice warm as dusk. Because the story I'll tell next might just make you believe. Forgiveness can't change the past, but it can save the future.